All right, we are on to Chapter 5, William Carey, page 55. A miserable enthusiast. William sat nervously gathering his thoughts during a lull in the conversation at a meeting of the ministers fraternal. One of the older ministers, the Reverend Ryland Sr., Father William's friend John Ryland, suggested that perhaps one of the younger members might have a new topic for conversation. All eyes seemed to turn to William, who knew what he wanted to say, but just didn't know how to say it the right way. The subject had to do with missions. The more William had read the Bible, the more convinced he had become that God expected Christians to share the gospel message with others, even people far across the ocean in newly discovered lands. This meant that churches in England had an obligation to send out missionaries to these newly discovered places. This was not a popular view in 1787. Most ministers believed that Jesus had given a task of sharing the gospel message to his 12 disciples, and that when they died, so did the job itself. Now, no one was required to share his or her faith, especially not in dangerous unknown regions. Many Christians went so far as to say that if God wanted the heathen in other lands to hear the gospel message, he could tell them himself without any help from human beings. After all, he was all-powerful, wasn't he? Yes. And you know what? Many Muslims are having dreams about Jesus. They're showing up. Let me put my hood on. So, the answer is yes, God can just show up, but he likes to use us as his hands and feet. So when we ignore Holy Spirit telling us, please go to this country or go to so-and-so and tell them about Jesus, he does resort to just sending his angels or just sending Jesus himself to show up in dreams. So if you're a Muslim and you are watching this video and you are having dreams of Jesus, that's exciting because I haven't even had a dream about Jesus. So,
Jesus gave me a dream once.
Yeah, Jesus can give you dreams. I've had dreams, but Jesus has never showed up in my room before, like I know he's doing for Muslims around the world. It's exciting. So if you are watching this video and you're wondering, how do I get this Jesus? You can just talk to God and say, God, I believe that you sent your son Jesus to bridge the gap between you and me, and that I can receive your love and forgiveness. And it's by faith that you receive that love and forgiveness. Okay. So, Reverend Carey, have you come up with a topic yet? Asked Reverend Ryland Sr. Maybe he would say it like this. Reverend Carey, have you come up with a topic yet? Yes, said William, adjusting his wig while still trying to get his thoughts in order. Then he stammered on, I would like to discuss the idea that when Jesus Christ gave the command to his disciples to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth, he meant it to include not just his disciples who were alive at the time, but all who would follow him from then on. The Reverend Ryland Sr. shot William an angry look and cleared his throat. Here we have an example of a young man who knows nothing about the plan of God, he said matter-of-factly. The Almighty does not need a man to speak for him. He will enlighten the heathen in his own way. When he sees fit, it is not our place to interfere with this process. He glared at William and pointed a finger in his direction for effect before continuing. And you, young man, are a miserable enthusiast for suggesting otherwise. With that, the discussion was over. William sat silently thinking about what had been said. Well, that wasn't a discussion then, was it? Pretty much just one-sided. Was he really a miserable enthusiast, meddling in things he knew nothing about? Was the Reverend Ryland Sr. right? Should he give up his goal of sharing the gospel message with the heathen? He would have to give the whole subject some more serious thought. Well, if they're spreading in England to the heathen, why wouldn't you be spreading it all over everywhere else? The Reverend Ryland Sr.'s remarks were intended to stop William from considering a Christian role in evangelizing the world. Surprisingly, though, they encouraged him. The more William thought about the arguments that had been put forward, the more he studied to see who was right. As he studied, he took careful notes. Before long, the notes turned into an essay, which turned into the manuscript for a book. William found the extra time needed to work on his manuscript from an unlikely source. Mr. Gotch, the man for whom he made shoes under contract, was a member of Andrew Fuller's church in Kettering. The Reverend Fuller had told Mr. Gotch what a fine minister William Carey was becoming. Mr. Gotch began to think that the shoemaker he had contracted to work for him was wasting his talents. So he wrote a letter to William Carey in which he said, "I do intend you should spoil any more of my leather, but you may proceed as fast as you can with your Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, and I will allow you from my own private purse 10 shillings a week." Wow. That guy recognized his talents. Wow. What a surprise awaited William as he opened the letter. From his savings, Mr. Gotch was going to pay him the same amount he had earned making shoes, only now he would be earning the money by studying to become a better minister. William kept on writing and studying, teaching himself Hebrew and Dutch to add to his Latin and Greek. He could not have been happier. Did you hear that? That was 1, 2, 3, 4 languages. It can be done, guys. All before there was even Google or YouTube or like Pimsleur or Rosetta Stone. And he's learning these languages from a book. Old school. Things at home were also going well. Felix now had 2 little brothers, William Jr. and Peter, who was named after William's favorite uncle. Most of the time, Dolly was fine as well, though sometimes she sat and stared blankly at the walls. She would also cry easily and sometimes forget to take care of the children. This worried William, but there wasn't much he could do about it. His mother had died in 1787, the year before William Jr. was born, and now William had no one to turn to for help. Although he had the manuscript for his book tucked safely in a leather satchel under his bed, William could not afford to get it published. £10, the amount needed, was a seventh of his yearly income, and he did not have that kind of money to spare. Besides, he couldn't be sure that, where was I? Anyone would buy a copy of it if it was published. Indeed, if a lot of other people thought the same way as Reverend Ryland Sr., William could well be run out of town for publishing his manuscript. 1789 saw another change for William, who was invited to become a pastor of a slightly larger but more troubled Baptist church in Leicester. William accepted the invitation to pastor the church, even though it meant moving into the smallest cottage he had ever lived in. With 3 noisy little boys and his wife expecting another baby, it wasn't easy fitting into the cottage, but they all did the best they could. William's salary at the new church was the same small amount it had been in Moulton. With his growing family, William once again had to think of a way to earn extra money. He decided to try school teaching again. While this was not his favorite thing to do, there was no school in Leicester at the time, and he felt sure he could attract enough students to make it worthwhile. Of course, teaching school made William busier than ever. He taught school from 9 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. To fit everything in, he made himself a strict schedule for his evenings. The schedule which he stuck to was as follows. Monday night, study foreign languages and translate something. Tuesday night, study science, history, and composition. Wednesday night, preach at church. Thursday night, visit friends and church members. Friday night and all day Saturday, prepare sermon. Sunday, preaching. Added to this were William's responsibilities as secretary of the Committee of Dissenters, which involved preaching in nearby towns and attending ministerial meetings. You know what? I think that schedule is quite possible because he did not have TV, he didn't have YouTube, he didn't have Roblox or Minecraft to play. Why not study 4 languages? Put your video games away and start studying your languages, kids. Ahora. Now. Okay, the next Carey baby was a girl, whom they named Lucy. Sometimes William felt sad as he held her and watched her. She reminded him so much of Anne, his first baby daughter, who had died. Tragically, when Lucy was 18 months old, she too became ill and died. Oh my goodness, the 1700s were so depressing. While William was deeply upset by her death, Dolly was thrown more deeply into depression. It took many weeks before she could be coaxed back into family activities. Thankfully, Dolly's younger sister, Kitty, stepped in to help William with the boys. Despite the family tragedy and his exhaustingly busy schedule, William always had it in the back of his mind the thought of telling people in foreign countries about the gospel message. He kept improving. I don't know. I'm recording, though. He kept improving his manuscript until finally it was finished. It even had a name. This is the name. It's so long. Okay. An inquiry into the obligations of Christians to use means for the conversion of the heathen, in which the religious state of the different nations of the world, the success of former undertakings, and the particibility of further undertakings are considered. That's even a long sentence.
That's the name of a book?
That's the name of his book.
Oh my goodness.
It was a very long title, even for those days when long book titles were fashionable. When the manuscript was finally published, most people just called it Inquiry. That's better. The book had 5 chapters. The first dealt with whether Christians in England had an obligation and responsibility to tell people in other lands about the gospel. The second chapter covered all the missionary work that had gone on since the days of Jesus. This chapter had required a lot of research and included a history of the world. The third chapter was a survey of everything that English people knew about the rest of the world. William had spent many hours putting together 23 pages of tables about different countries. Each table showed the name of the country or island, its length and breadth, its estimated population, and its religions, customs, and beliefs. William had begun the basic research for this chapter 8 because 8 years before, when he'd drawn the map of the world for the schoolhouse in Milton. By the time he had finished his research, William Carey probably knew more about world geography than anyone else in England. In fact, his book contained more geography, history, and religion than had previously been put into any other single book. The 4th chapter in William's book was on the ways in which Christians could preach the gospel message in foreign lands. It outlined some of the dangers and difficulties a missionary would face and explained the best way to travel to foreign places and how to avoid being killed by heathen people once the missionary arrived. It also covered what foods were safe to eat and how to find a place to live, as well as how to quickly learn foreign language. Oh, like a Boy Scout. William read many books in the course of preparing this chapter, though he had a lot of first-hand knowledge to share about learning foreign languages. I'll give you a hint. How to learn a foreign language is learn grammar first. Grammar. The 5th and final chapter was about how to raise the money needed to go as a missionary to another country. I'd say just pray. For this time, Inquiry was the most well-researched Christian paper ever written, and William Carey wanted desperately to get it published. The question was how. In 1791, soon after completing work on the final version of his manuscript, William was attending a ministers' meeting in the city of Birmingham, where he was introduced to a young man named Tom Potts. Tom had been to America, and William wanted to hear all about his trip. William became very interested in Tom's descriptions of the horrible slave trade Tom had seen while in America. Soon the two men were discussing all sorts of things, and William began to talk about the need for missionaries. "You should write this down," exclaimed Tom Potts after hearing William's reason why missionaries were needed in foreign lands. "Every Christian needs to hear the argument for missions as clearly as you have just told it to me." "As a matter of fact, it is all written down," said William shyly. "Then tell me where I can buy a copy of your book. What is it called?" asked Tom Potts eagerly. William admitted the book was not yet published because of lack of funds. "The message must get out," Tom Potts exclaimed. "I would count it an honor to pay for the book to be published myself." True to his word, Tom Potts paid for the first printing of Inquiry, which was published on May 12, 1792, and sold for 1 shilling and 6 pence. 3 weeks after the book was published, William was scheduled to speak at a Baptist ministers' meeting. As always, he spoke about the need for missionaries, but this time something was different. Many of his fellow ministers had already read his book and were beginning to understand what he had been telling them for so long. William Carey finished his speech with 2 phrases that would ring around the world for more than a century after his death. "Expect great things from God. Attempt great things for God." Expect great things from God. Attempt great things for God. At last, several of William's fellow ministers were convinced it was time to attempt something for God. On October 2nd, 1792, a group of 12 ministers met to make plans. Among them were William's friends John Ryland, Andrew Fuller, and John Sutcliffe. The men were all ministers of small churches filled with poor farmers and laborers. Some received enough money from their pastoral duties to support their families, while others, like William, had to take on a second job. All of them wanted to do something to further the cause of missions, but what? In the end, they decided to start a society, which they named the Particular Baptist Society, for propagating the gospel. Each one in the group promised to give as much money as he could to the new society. I wonder if it's like a nonprofit. When all the pledges were added up, they totaled 13 pounds. William pledged to give all the money he made from his book. For William, something far greater than money had happened to the meeting.
What's greater than money?
Oh, it happened at the meeting. Finally, after years of preaching about the need for missionaries, William's book had convinced a group of men to take the call seriously. William could hardly wait to see what would happen next. Many questions were raised at the first official meeting of the Particular Baptist Society for propagating the gospel. What qualifications should a missionary have? Did anyone know a person who was qualified and willing to be sent out as a missionary? I'd say whoever's willing to go is, like, qualified. Why do you have to have qualifications? Where was a good place to send a missionary? What should he do when he got there? Should a missionary have a job there? Should he take his family with him? Should he travel back to England to report on his progress? After all, there had never been an English missionary society before, so there was no pattern to follow. Obviously, a lot of things had to be thought through before the first missionary could be sent out. As the ministers dealt with all these details, an unspoken question hung in the air. Who would be the first missionary? Bum, bum, bum. That concludes chapter 5.